Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I am your hostess, Lori Adams Brown, and you are listening to our 10th episode. In this episode, I get to interview my friend Gracia Berrios. She lives here in the Bay Area. I got to know her through Echo Church because that's where we both attend. And she has been helping with some of our Echo Compassion efforts during this COVID pandemic time. And she's been just volunteering as a project manager to work with Operation Palm Leaf, which is an organization that has needed some volunteers to help reach out to those who are only Spanish speakers in the community. And so she's helped us find some Spanish speakers to work with this organization to provide opportunities to help them during this pandemic. But her regular job is she works for a nonprofit here in the Bay Area that helps to provide legal services for those who are in need, especially immigrants, and particularly she works with a lot of DACA cases. So today we're going to talk a lot about that. She herself is an immigrant. She immigrated to the U.S. as a baby, and her family came to the States from Peru. So she's going to talk a little bit about that too, but just listen in today because she's going to really dig into some of the areas of how a lot of our policies in the United States are affecting a lot of our DACA cases, and just get an insider's point of view to some of the situations and the stories that she's familiar with here in the Bay Area. So welcome to the show, my friend Gracia Berrios. Hi, Gracia.
Hi, Lori.
Thanks for being on the show.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I've known you for a little while, but you're new to all my listeners. So I'd love it if you just gave a little introduction to yourself, like tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. My name is Gracia. I work at a nonprofit in San Francisco called One Justice, and we specifically we try to help legal service providers in the Bay Area for underserved Californians seeking legal services. It can be incredibly expensive to find legal services for a good price, or even some not price at all. So we do our best to have like free legal workshops, support legal service providers, have immigration workshops, criminal justice workshops, among other things. I basically grew up here in the Bay Area. I've been originally I grew up in Sonoma County for most of my life, more up north. And yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Yeah, it's so great. I love what you do. So I wanted to have you on to talk about your experiences, both personally and in the work that you do with immigration, since we're doing this immigration series. And I know that you've told me your own personal story of immigration when you came here as a child. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
love for you to share that story of like your own personal journey with immigration from the perspective of when you were a child and maybe how you see it for yourself today as well.
Yeah, of course. So me and my family were originally all from Peru. I was born there, and we immigrated to the States about when I was a year old. So we came here in 1995. And it was me, my brother, and my parents. To say that it was a process is an understatement. Um, I thankfully we would go back a lot to Peru for paperwork, among other things, but also like visiting family. And I kind of got to see it in the eyes as well as like how my parents took it, right? So kind of like them coming as, adults themselves. They were in their 40s, raising two children, coming to a completely new country. I can only imagine it's a lot.
Yeah.
So something that my dad told me growing up is like, my mom would cry for the first 2 years of being here in the States because it was just so, so difficult for her.
Yeah.
She left her whole family behind. My dad left his whole family behind as well, but like my mom was really close with her family. She has 6 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And so, we have a pretty big family in Peru. So just kind of seeing it from that perspective. But yeah, we officially became citizens when I was in middle school. So I remember growing up, my brother prepping for the naturalization exam, my parents prepping for the naturalization exam. Me as like a 12-year-old, I didn't really like know like what it even meant. It's like, why are they
Yeah.
studying history, like US history questions? Like what's going on?
Right.
Like I thought I was only supposed to do that since I'm in school. Um, but yeah, and so like I remember going to like the oath ceremony, and like I visibly remember like my parents like tearing up and just like, but for me, like as a child, I still like I couldn't really grasp it until like I became older, like in high school. It's like, oh wow, like this is like it's a big deal for a lot of people. In addition to it's a long, long process.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yep.
It's complicated. You need to have the right resources, the right connections. So yeah, that's like our little immigration story. It's definitely, there were still some like, how you say, like hurdles that you had to overcome in terms of like there was a point in our residency that like we weren't even sure if like we could move forward with the citizenship process. And I remember one time my dad telling me like, yeah, like our Lord told us straight up to our face, like, I think maybe you should go back to Peru.
Wow.
And we had already been here in the country for like over a decade, you
Wow.
know.
Yeah.
So that's like I can imagine how hard that must be to hear as like a parent. Like that's probably pretty scary.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of like regarding your second question, do you mind repeating that question again?
Yeah. Just mostly like how you process it as an adult. Cause I know, I mean, if you were one, you don't really have a memory of the moment you guys left Peru.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, you processed it as a 12-year-old going through the whatever that looks like. What was that, seventh or sixth grade or something
Yeah.
like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously as an adult, you probably see your whole immigration story in a different way. So
Yeah, I mean, I think especially like right now, how I see it, like being in my 20s, like going to college, like understand it so much more deeper, like how much work it took for my parents to come here to this country. One, to go through the process of a visa, then a residency, and then citizenship. It took a lot of work. Um, and I think right now, like I'm very like appreciative of that. And it reminds me like how, and I always say this, but it's like how resilient immigrants are
yeah.
in terms of like the battles that we have to like overcome, the circumstances, just everything that comes with that word immigrant.
Yeah.
So it's just like being going from like a 12-year-old to like now being in my 20s, it's like I understand it so much more deeper. It's such a complex system,
Yeah.
especially right now where we are.
Yep.
As a country, it's so much more complex. But it's also so much more complex right now because of like what's going on right now.
Yeah.
So like, but yeah, so I guess that's a little bit about that.
Well, so what year was it that you guys finally officially became, um, do they say nationalized? What do they?
That's actually a good question. Or we just say when you officially got your citizenship is what I guess I usually hear. So honestly, I just remember that my mom has like the memory of an elephant. So I personally don't know. I think it was like September when I was in 8th grade, I would say.
Okay.
Shoot, so that would maybe like 2008,
Okay.
2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that helps because one of the things we'll dig into a little deeper is how the immigration policies have changed a little bit in recent years. Um, but it does give us context that even back then in 2008, there was work that needed to be done within the system that a lot of people were
Mm-hmm.
calling out for. But I think
Yeah.
it's increased as we've gotten more narrow. So I guess my next question was, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing on behalf of immigrants here in California and the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, we do multiple free legal workshops. And so what that means is we partner up with legal service providers here in the Bay Area, and we also partner up with the private sector. So what that means is we connect the legal service providers with our pro bono volunteers.
Okay.
And so we're like the middle ground essentially for these free legal workshops. So we have obviously now pivoted into a virtual Zoom clinics that we have now with our clients. And so far, it's been really great to see how much we've been able to come through with since being in the pandemic. I think like I want to say an estimate of like I'll go into nit and gritties, but I just say like an estimate of like probably almost like 200, no, not 200, maybe like over 100 people we have helped for like specific immigrants, in our virtual clinics. So what we've been doing these past few months, we started off with DACA.
Uh-huh.
So that was like our first virtual DACA clinics. And the reason why we wanted to start off with DACA was because, well, just a little backstory. Previously to the pandemic, we had our physical immigration workshops, and we offered 3 immigration screenings. So we had DACA, general immigration screenings, which is like folks that are undocumented to see if they can apply for any kind of like legal status here in the States, and naturalization. So we'd offer all of those 3 in our physical
Okay.
clinics.
Okay.
And when we pivoted to virtual, we're like, well, we can only do one, because it's
Okay.
being way too complicated to do 3 of them in a virtual setting.
Yeah.
And we decided to do DACA.
Okay.
And we're like, part of the reason this was like in March or May or April around that time when we wanted to do DACA was because of everything that was going on with DACA at that point.
Right.
So in case folks don't know, September of 2017, I believe Trump cut out new applicants for DACA.
Yeah.
So that was the very beginning process of basically the Trump administration trying to eliminate DACA, which is incredibly scary.
Mm-hmm.
It basically led to, because Trump wanted to eliminate DACA, it basically like led to the hands of the Supreme Court to decide if DACA was going to continue or not.
Yeah.
And Supreme Court had until the end of June was their deadline. So it started like their deadline was ended the end of June of this year if DACA was going to continue or not. So obviously they had from like I think November of last year, so like I said, June of this year. And as the months got closer, I could only imagine how much anxiety that must have been for DACA recipients.
Yeah. Crazy.
Um, so just like literally having like their lives, like their lives in the hands of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So and what DACA is, just a little bit of backstory. DACA enables young, mostly millennials, and I would say Gen Zers, to work legally here in the States, have a work visa, and not be deportable,
Yeah.
which is huge. And that was mainly a community push, which a lot of people sometimes forget. Because of the community, because of undocumented people, that's why DACA exists. Um, so that was our first like virtual clinic that we pivoted to, and it ended up turning out really, really well. I think we helped like, I don't know, maybe like 50 DACA recipients in all the virtual clinics that we did, because we wanted to do it every 2 weeks,
Uh-huh.
just because we didn't know when DACA was going to end and if it was going to end.
Right.
So we're like, okay, let's help out. Let's like just do as many as we can, because right now the most important thing is for them to renew their DACA.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, hopefully I didn't
No,
blur
that's
too
good.
much about it.
No, it's great. You know what? A lot of our listeners aren't even in the United States. Some are U.S. citizens living abroad. We have like people in a lot of different nations, but I think there's some similar situations regarding immigration going on in other countries around the world right now, like in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, Europe, lots of countries in Europe and New Zealand, a lot of different places. I know even Peru, right, is receiving a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Venezuelan
Yeah.
immigrants. And so
Yeah.
there's, just people listening in different countries that are facing maybe not the exact situation legally that we have going on with our Supreme Court making decisions, but I think people can relate on those levels. And so it's helpful to explain what DACA is. So correct me if I'm wrong, because honestly, I've just lived in the United States for the past year, living most of my life abroad, but I would read about the U.S. news overseas, of course, through like BBC and different perspectives. But
Mm-hmm.
so when they say DACA, they also often refer to them as the Dreamers as well. Is that right?
I've heard different things, to be honest.
Okay.
I've heard, I personally have some friends that are DACA recipients that don't
Okay.
like that don't want to be categorized as the dreamers.
Okay.
And then others that do. I
Okay.
know that in like the very like mainstream media, like a lot of us do say dreamers.
Uh-huh.
But I think I've gone to a point where I now say DACA recipients over dreamers, because I think of like what I've like the feedback I've received from personal DACA recipients.
Uh-huh.
I honestly don't know too much about it, just like
Yeah.
besides that some of them just don't identify as dreamers.
Okay. And
Yeah.
do you have any idea why, like what the difference is that they're perceiving on those, like why they wouldn't want to be called that?
I honestly
Okay.
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That'll give me a little research to do
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
I'll have to meet some people and find out why. No, that's good. That's really helpful for those of us, especially who aren't living in the United States, listening today.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of cases, and would this be in the DACA category too, where there's, maybe their parents came here, their parents came here and don't necessarily have a legal status, but that
Mm-hmm.
the kids were either born here or just raised here. Is that also considered DACA?
Yeah, so DACA only qualifies for like, it's, how do I explain it? Like they like I said, they're millennials and Gen Zers that qualify for DACA because they cross the border with their parents as like basically kids.
Yeah.
So the whole reason behind DACA was like, well, you can't blame the, like, not, this isn't me saying, but this is like, the law saying like you can't blame the kids for also crossing the border with the parents, because of course they were going to cross the border with the parents, kind of thing.
Right.
So DACA is only for the children at that certain age that qualified for DACA.
Got it.
And also, like, a lot of people don't know that you have to have like a quote unquote good moral, I guess, like stand-in, you would say, to even apply, like be eligible for DACA. So what
Okay.
that means is like you either have to be in college, you have to show that you're going to work, you can't have anything on your criminal record. So it's like you have to like be very, very like you have to follow like the laws incredibly well, and and to a certain extent, in order to qualify for DACA.
Okay.
There was DAPA before,
Okay.
which was for the parents of DACA recipients. But unfortunately, that's one of the first things that Trump took away in his first, I don't know how many months that took when he became president, but he took that
Yeah.
very quickly away.
Yeah, that's really helpful information just to walk us through that process, and refresh our memories, or at least some of us, it's for the first time we're hearing some of this. So, when you think of an immigrant,
Hmm.
what do you think of? Because everybody, it seems like, has different stereotypes around
Yeah.
immigrant, and depending on where they live, what country they're in, what their experiences are with immigrants. And then I guess a lot of people don't know anybody that's recently immigrated to the country in which they live. So I
Hmm.
just want to know what you think of, because you are yourself an immigrant and you're around a lot of immigrants. So what do you think of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of that word, I mean, I think for me in my personal life, just with the communities that I'm around, the people that I'm around, I mean, and I said this earlier, like I'm around so many hardworking immigrants.
Yeah.
Whether it's people in the agricultural fields, like picking our food.
Yeah.
In the midst, for folks that don't know, there have been like a lot of wildfire fires in the state of California in the midst of
Mm-hmm.
a pandemic. So the smoke has been terrible here in the state of California
Yeah.
for a very long time. And, you know, in the midst of that, we have a lot of hardworking immigrants picking our tomatoes, our lettuce, our, you know, fruits and vegetables that we need to get on our tables.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of work. Like
Yeah.
I can only imagine how much work that like must be, you know?
Yeah. Hard,
Um,
hard, hard work.
yeah, hard work. So like, you know, I think of hardworking people, and I said this earlier, I think you know, of resilience, because, you know, we've had to just, you know, the amount of pressure that we receive from so many different communities, it can be overwhelming. And so, you know, I think of like resilience. I also think of like, you know, I think of immigrant. I think that I'm able to have those like shared like mindsets in a way, those shared, not shared, like shared experiences that we're all able to relate to each other in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
It can, and it could get us into that like deeper level of connection. So it's like, you know, say like I would come across somebody that I've met and like they told me like their sort of how they immigrated, and like, you know, that's more of a personal thing for me, right? Because I also
Yeah.
have that as well.
Yeah.
So it's like we're able to relate on it's like so much more deeper level. You know, we're very like community driven.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are a few things that I think of.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure when you share those stories, like, you remember the story in your own family of your mom crying for 2 years, leaving behind, 6 brothers and sisters, and I think that that is, it's a very difficult space for a
Yeah.
family, just to go and just completely start over with no connections and
Mm-hmm.
nobody to vouch for you and be like, this family with this last name, they have a good reputation, so
Yeah.
like, let them in your school, or let them in
Yeah,
your workplace, or
exactly.
sell them a good car. I mean, as much as we say America is a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and, live the American dream and make it for yourself, a lot of us have had a bit of help in this
Mm-hmm.
nation to get somewhere. And a lot of it is just reputation. And when you start over from scratch, I mean, you do cry for a couple of years at least, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
is a way to bond, I'm sure, with people, especially people who come here without the language and are working really hard to provide food for
Mm-hmm.
all of us. That's a very special club, I would imagine, being a part of.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
well, I would love for you to speak a little bit about what your thoughts are on just some of the misconceptions that you have come across that people might have about immigrants that you would like to clear up.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I think especially right now where we are in this country, in terms of like our current administration, among other things, I personally feel like these misconceptions have gotten even so much more worse in a
Yeah.
way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like we hear the typical like, oh, they're here to steal our jobs, they're here
Yeah.
to hoard like the money from the government, or like whatever it
Yeah.
may be, or like they're criminals, don't let them come into this country.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, a lot of people don't know that people are every single day are literally risking their lives to come to this country.
Yeah.
And they're risking their lives because they're fleeing from violence,
Mm-hmm.
from starvation, from, all these things that, to want to even like protect their family,
Yeah.
to come to a new place. So it's like, immigrants are not criminals.
Yeah.
That's something that we need to like name, and it's not like a collective like name for immigrants. A lot of people don't know this, but like, there's over like 11 million undocumented people in this country.
Wow.
And a lot of us think that undocumented people don't pay for taxes, but actually undocumented people pay for billions of dollars in this country.
Wow.
Um, and a lot of people don't know that because it's like, oh, like, they don't even pay for taxes because they don't have a social security number. Like, why do you let them in this country? It's like, no, they do. And then on top of that, undocumented immigrants that don't have, because they don't have a social security number, they pay for taxes and they don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a lot.
Yeah.
So those are like, I feel like a few misconceptions. It's like, it really pisses me off when like people say like, oh, like they're stealing our jobs. It's like, okay, then how about you do it? Why
Yeah.
aren't
You
you
go
out there?
pick the tomatoes. Yeah. Exactly.
Like, why aren't you out there in the midst of a pandemic and wildfire season and picking like tomatoes, avocados? Like, I don't see
Yeah.
you out there.
Right. Exactly.
Um, yeah, so those are a few misconceptions. Like, it gets on my nerves really, because it's like, it's not okay. It really
Yeah.
isn't.
It isn't. I agree. And it's good just to clear those up because none of us benefit from stereotypes. And I think most
Mm-hmm.
stereotypes can be, um, you know, reset in our minds to the truth when we're around plenty of people for whom that stereotype should apply and yet doesn't. And one of the best ways to get over stereotype is just to get to know people that you're stereotyping.
Mm-hmm.
And and then if you get to know several of them and you realize none of them actually fit into that stereotype, then suddenly you realize, well, that was an unfair stereotype, because
Mm-hmm.
we've all had stereotypes placed on us no matter who we are. Even white men have
Yeah.
stereotypes placed on them. Women certainly do. People of a certain socioeconomic
Mm-hmm.
status, people who go to a certain school or drive a certain car or have a certain number of kids or don't have kids, like we can all
Absolutely.
face that. And it's just good to get to know people for whom those stereotypes supposedly apply, and then just figure out if it's true. And like you're saying, you know so many of them, and those aren't true. And I over and
Mm-hmm.
over again I hear people say that on this immigration series, those same things that you're saying, like immigrants come here mostly not because they're criminals, but because life where they were is not sustainable for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. And they're
Yeah.
coming here because they love America and they believe in America and they want to
Mm-hmm.
be a part of it, not that they want to destroy it or see it fall apart. And so that rhetoric really, it does need to be changed. And I'm glad you spoke to that. I'd love to also know, for you, I know you're a person of faith because I met you here at
Mm-hmm.
Echo Church. And so when you think about like your faith and what you understand from the scriptures, why do you think it is important for us to care for immigrants, and what part of your faith compels you to do that?
Yeah, these past few weeks I think I've been really resonating on the first two commandments that Jesus told us to do and act upon, which was like, love me and also love others.
Yeah.
I don't know, Laura, if you can tell me that specific verse.
Yeah. It's the love God and love your neighbor, that
Yeah,
you're talking about those two, the first and
yeah.
second commandment. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, I think it's just been on my heart these past few weeks. One, I think partly because I'm part of like an Echo community group, and part of our like weekly check-ins is to do like our daily verses and stuff like that. And I don't know, I think that one just kind of like tugged on my heart this past few weeks, just because God is commanding us to love our neighbor, to love others. And in that, that's loving immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you love immigrants, right? It's like that's another like call to action.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's kind of just like been my on my mind. And also like, and I tell this to folks too when we have these like I think I specifically tell these maybe to folks who like maybe aren't in the right, don't know that much about like immigration in terms of like maybe faith or whatever, but like Jesus also, like in a way, like he when him and When he was I think when he was a baby, and Mary and Joseph, like, they fled,
Yep.
right? They
Yep.
they fled, and so like Jesus was like a refugee in a way,
Yeah, he was.
because like he was fleeing from violence.
Yep.
Um, and I think sometimes, especially like people maybe in the Christian community that maybe don't accept immigrants, maybe buy into like the whole stereotypes and don't know much about it. It's like they forget that the person that is our Christ and Savior, was a refugee.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think I kind of tie it in as that as well. It's like, like we need to remember that too.
Yep.
I'm sure that was a very, very scary experience for Joseph and Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as like having a baby there and, just everything on that. But yeah, that's been on my mind these past few weeks.
Yeah, that's really good. There's also, these verses that talk about when we serve the least of these, it's like we're serving Jesus himself. And when
Mm-hmm.
you were reminding us of that, period of time where, babies were being killed, they had to
Mm-hmm.
flee with their babies so that, Jesus would stay alive. And, um, it's just a reminder there are people coming here in the United States with their babies fleeing violence. We
Yeah.
hear a lot of stories in Central America, and so like the desperation that people feel, and it really is when we reach out to them, it really is like, reaching out to Jesus himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's a really beautiful reminder. We can feel so detached, and we can either pay attention and listen and get involved, or we can just ignore it. And I'm sure there were people in Jesus's day that also just, it didn't affect them. It
Yeah,
wasn't their people.
absolutely.
It wasn't their babies. And so they could just,
Mm-hmm.
turn the other way. But we have an
Yeah.
opportunity to pay attention. And I think Jesus calls us to look it straight in the face and know that he's there, right? And he's right in those
Mm-hmm.
situations, caring for people, and wants to care for them through us, right? Through the church.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so in the US, I know there's a lot of ways to come in. And we touched a little bit earlier on some of the current policies and processes that have changed over time. And so I want us to, do a little more of a deep dive into that for just a sec. I know that, like, you can come into the US, like here in Silicon Valley, we have people here on H-1B visas. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
people come in because maybe their spouse is here and they can come in on like a spouse visa or a student visa if you're studying at a university. There's also asylum seekers, which for the most part has been shut down. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different ways to immigrate.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the current immigration policies and processes from your perspective.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately my thoughts are probably gonna be very sad.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of disclaimer there. I had my policy meeting today, like a few hours ago, and we had a little bit of an update about
Okay.
even another more just horrible thing that's happening in the asylum world.
Mm,
But I think an overview, that I would start with is just this administration has made it so, so, so difficult for immigrants, for
yeah.
people coming here to this country as as asylum seekers. And it's been really challenging, like really, really challenging. Like I think maybe it was a few weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit Court basically allowed the Department of Homeland Security to terminate temporary protected status. And so, what a little bit about that? It's called the TPS program. In a
Okay.
way, it is similar to DACA. That
Okay.
basically it allows people specifically from El Salvador, from Haiti, from Nicaragua, and Sudan to have it's essentially what it is, like a temporary protected status in this
Okay.
country. And so, because of the administration that we are in right now, it is most likely going to terminate.
Mm,
And
wow.
this ruling, it affects more than 300,000 TPS holders in this country.
Wow.
So it's a lot of people that could potentially be in position of deportation.
Wow.
So it's scary. It's scary. That's one thing that's been going on these past few weeks. Another thing, this is just like a little bit of a trigger warning. Um, Just like with what's been going on in ICE detention centers, specifically, we call them prisons.
Right. Yep.
With the I can't pronounce it. I can never pronounce it. Hysterectomy? Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know. We'll go with that one.
I cannot. I always pronounce it where it's hysterectomy. Oh my gosh. Okay. Basically, there have been nurses in. They're even actually qualified nurses now that I think of it. But there have been
hysterectomy.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
hysterectomy.
yes.
Thank you, Lori. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm not good with my words sometimes.
It's okay. My mom is a nurse, but she also works on the border, and so I hear the stories from her because she worked in OB as a nurse for a long time. But then she's also helping with immigrants coming out of the ICE detention centers, and so I've been hearing the stories from her about hysterectomies. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Keep
going. So thank you. So so it leaked out. So a Black woman actually decided to in a way put her work at risk to inform the public, like, hey, this is what's going on in detention centers right now. And I personally, when I saw that, seeing that literally there's nurses like taking out their, what is it, like their uterus? Is it specifically?
It's basically a surgery you do so that you can no longer have children. Like people do it typically, like you would do it if you had some issues and you were maybe hemorrhaging or something like that. Like it's not an elective thing that people do unless there's something wrong.
Exactly. And so like they've been literally doing that on a woman without the woman's consent. And so like my Twitter blew up like last week, and I was like, oh my gosh, like what the heck is going on? Like ICE detention centers are already horrible as it is. Horrible.
Right.
And we're seeing something else so much more, like, this is like another thing on top of that. So that has currently been happening in the detention centers among thousands of people there, getting COVID, elders getting COVID. I think one of my colleagues yesterday helped release a $10,000 bond for an elder that was pretty like was in the position of potentially getting COVID in that ICE detention center, and they thankfully had the money to release that elder. So it's there's a lot going on, and it really, really breaks my heart. It really does, because it's like, what more can we do at this point? And something else that's going on, I don't know if you heard about this, but there's also on top of this a naturalization increase fee that is set for October 2nd that was created by the Trump administration. So I don't think I talked about this earlier, but we also do naturalization virtual clinics. We've been doing them for a while now. Our next one is next month on October 22nd. And this is after the deadline.
So people will have to pay more basically at that one.
So basically right now people pay $725. And if they qualify for a fee waiver, they pay less. And what the Trump administration is doing, one, they're going to take out both the fee waivers, the full fee waiver and the partial fee waiver, and increase it to like $1,200, $1,300 or something ridiculous like that.
It's like double the price.
And it's like, why? Like, we don't need this right now. We're in the midst of a pandemic. Millions of people have lost their lives. What's going on? Like, and so like, it's just like, honestly, Lori, like, I feel like every day there's like a horrible news regarding like just the immigrant community and just some unlawful, horrible thing that this administration has done to my community. And it can be emotionally really tiring sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure.
But that's an overview. Hopefully I didn't say too much, but I just wanted to give a few trigger warnings, and just, it's a lot to say and a lot to hear as well.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because we're certainly in an era in the United States, and I would say around the world, where we can get our information through such an echo chamber. My family on family movie night last Friday, we watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
I heard
And
that's good.
it's very good. Yeah. But I mean, we all knew this whole idea that if you aren't very proactive, your newsfeed will be based on algorithms of who they think you are, based on likes that you like on Facebook or friends that you have and all these things. And they will feed you a certain kind of news.
Yeah.
And so there are potentially people listening to this podcast that really don't even understand things from this perspective, that are reading something completely different. And so I think it's just important for whatever we can control that we know for sure is verified factually, because we've met these people, we've been around these systems, we are working with people, and see those fees get charged, and all the things that you have firsthand information about. It's always better to get it from firsthand information, just because there's so much junk out there that causes us to be full of stereotypes and full of even anger and hatred toward people that really, it's undeserved. They're just they're hurting and they need our help, and we certainly have a lot of resources in this nation, and the United States is supposedly built as a nation that wants to help others, and yet we these are just the facts of what's going on, and so I think it's important to know, even though it's hard to look at, it's important to know, because once we know, when we're empowered with the truth can help set us all free from the greed that we're all around, that would teach us that this is a land for only a few select kinds of people, and those who are hurting and in need and are fleeing violence and are desperate. They really need our help, and we have resources to help, and it's a time to step up. And so I'm just glad you shared it, even though it's hard to hear. And also just that the whole idea of, like, I guess it's more like eugenics or whatever is happening on the border of, like, not allowing certain people to have children. We can only imagine the reasons behind that, but it seems whatever it is very dark and very evil and awful, and we just need to call it what it is. And for those of us who value life and the sanctity of life, that's important to us. That people are treated, people made in God's image, right? That we're all deserving of love and respect, and that no one should have the ability to bear children taken away from them without their own consent, right? It's a horrible thing. So I want to change a little bit here, but just to kind of dig into the question of, like, you mentioned how you came as an immigrant yourself, and I know that you were a baby at the time, and maybe you've heard stories from your family, but you yourself being an immigrant, how do you feel like you have been received and welcomed here in the United States, and specifically in California? What are things that you feel like you hope get repeated from your own experience?
I think at an early age, especially in California, for folks that don't know, majority of Latinos are Mexican. And something that I would get a lot growing up was like, oh, you're not Mexican, like, and this is specific, and that isn't in a bad way or anything. It's like, oh, like, oh my gosh, like, tell me, like, and this, I hope this isn't like coming off like shaming Mexicans at all. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. It's just like, like, oh, like, you're from like a different country kind of thing. And even the Mexicans themselves, when I talk to a lot of like Mexicanos, it's like, oh my gosh, like, where are you from? Your accent is so different, like, kind of thing. And so definitely, like, in terms of like, my dad, he works in a nonprofit, specifically Christian nonprofit. And at an early age, his boss like completely welcomed us into this country in a way of like bringing in like our culture, our our food, our like what we grew up with, just like everything that like he just wanted to like learn so much more. And for those that don't know, like, Peruvian food is like really good. And so something that like something I definitely get common when people ask me like, where are you from? It's like, oh, I'm from Peru. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, your food is so good. And so, like, there's kind of that little like icebreaker, I guess you would say, that people like, I guess maybe like given the opportunity or whatever. But and I definitely have felt that people just being curious about that, being curious about like our immigration story, also being like empathetic as well. I think something that we need to remember is like, you know, how are we being empathetic to other communities, to immigrant communities right now? Um, you know, specifically like also how are we being empathetic to like Black immigrants right now that do probably receive most of the stereotypes.
Yep.
And so like I hope that, you know, a lot of the, I wouldn't say most of the empathy that we have received, I hope that can also be passed along.
Yeah.
And I do my best to do that as well. Like hearing, you know, clients' stories of their, you know, their immigration stories, like them opening up to me. Even them, like sometimes I'm in a position where they tell me such like really deep things that like, you know, I ask if I can pray over them.
Yeah.
Just as like, because majority of the people, I don't know, Laura, if you would agree, majority of people like they do like to receive prayer.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes given the opportunity, it's like, hey, is it okay if I pray for you right now, kind of thing. Um, but just like I think kind of like that. So that's what I would hope for.
That's so great. And I just think that those are some very practical things that that give us an example of what to repeat. I would just say
Mm-hmm.
most immigrants really love their food, and a lot of them have to leave it behind, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
especially if you're from a place that, you know, is a smaller country and maybe the ingredients can't be found here. I mean, in California, we do get most things, so we're very
Mm-hmm.
blessed, but it's largely because of all the immigrants, which is awesome. But some people immigrate to parts of the world or parts of the US even that are more homogeneous, and maybe they can't get their food. But I think that is just one special thing you can do, is just to, you know, and share food with someone from their country and hear their story. Just like you said,
Mm-hmm.
everybody has a story. And if you've left your country to go to another one, there's always some pain and grief.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have joy in the new place, there's always it's like a death in a lot of ways to leave
Right.
behind where you're from. And it's
Yeah.
like your identity issues change, and just that story can be full of both trauma and joy at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. Just being empathetic, like you said, to the feelings of all of it, of that story,
Mm-hmm.
is really good. And I'm glad that your family experienced that and that you're getting to repeat it, especially the prayer part, praying for people, because
Yeah.
people, yeah, we need hope from a higher power than us to help us get through so much of what's happening right now. And I'm sure immigrants are especially in need of that, with all the policies and changes and the stress and anxiety of not knowing what's ahead for them. For
Mm-hmm.
sure is very something we can very much pray for.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, I'd love for you just to say, what are some other practical ways people could help immigrants, just from your perspective? And then also I'd be interested in any systemic ways that people could help.
Yeah. I mean, some practical ways. I don't know if it maybe goes in hands with like systemic, but like, you know, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Lori, like just like be really careful of like where you hear what you're hearing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just kind of like, you know, actually doing your own research as well.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that's probably one of the first things that comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think a practical way would be also, you know, also like what are some maybe nonprofits that maybe you can volunteer with.
Mm.
Right now, there's maybe if you yourself are a lawyer or are in law school, can you maybe do some pro bono work?
Yeah.
You know, specifically with the immigrant communities. I know Raices is a great organization that does that specifically is an immigrant led organization, among
That's
other
awesome.
organizations. But yeah, I mean, get in also being okay with like being uncomfortable.
That's
Um,
good. That's good.
like I think that's a practical way, like, you know, with that, because like I think in our uncomfortable moments, especially like right now where we are as a country, we learn from being uncomfortable and being okay that, you know, that you messed up maybe in the past, but also growing
Mm-hmm.
from that and not maybe making those errors again, because it's like, oh, okay, like maybe I shouldn't have said this before, or maybe
Yeah.
I should have called out that person when they said that. How can I
Yeah.
do that differently this next time around?
Mm.
So yeah, those are, I feel like, more of like simple, practical ways. And then in terms of like systemic ways, like something, you know, that comes to mind, I think especially just like with this, um, just like with racial justice right now and just with everything going on, you know, it's not just like your individual capacity, but I think it's also a collective responsibility
Yeah.
to like dismantle the lies that we hear every single day. And whether it's like from a neighbor, from, you know, like your colleague, it's like, and like I said, like that's definitely an uncomfortable moment.
Yeah.
But it's also like an opportunity to teach that person that maybe didn't know
Yeah.
what they were saying, or you know, grow from that as well. But you know, it's not just like an individual perspective. It's like we, like, especially in a Christian community, it's like it's our collective responsibility um to help immigrants in that way. Um but yeah, so those are a few things that come in my mind.
Those are good. Those are really good. Those are very specific things that we can all do. And it even reinvigorates me in some areas of passion to dig deeper into those. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I wanted you to leave us with maybe a story of an immigrant that would capture what you feel like people might need to know about immigrants um, right now. Like, if you can think of someone, maybe a DACA situation or somebody that you've encountered, anything that would just be a story that can compel us about the nature of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know, right? I mean, in terms of like DACA, and I know I said this like previously, or maybe I didn't, but like there is currently right now like 700,000 DACA recipients in the country, and out of the 700,000, I think there's like 30,000 of them that are health worker providers in the midst of a pandemic.
Wow.
So it's a big number.
Yeah.
And I think something like very early on in like my virtual DACA renewal clinics, I basically was in the position to tell the clients like, hey, like DACA might end like next week.
Mm.
And you might not be able to work.
Wow.
And so it was really, really difficult for me to say those things. But the reason why I had to say is because sometimes some, you know, some DACA recipients didn't know what was going on. So I was just kind of catching them up on it.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted to know like, hey, like this is what's gonna this is what might happen, because like, you know, it's in the hands right now of the Supreme Court, and they might reject it or they might not. And you know, I think them expressing like, oh my gosh, like what am I gonna do? Like what's gonna happen? Like how, you know, like how am I gonna like feed my children? How am I gonna feed my parents? How am I gonna
Yeah.
finish school? Like I'm
Yeah.
in like, I think one person I was talking to, they were like in their senior year of college.
Wow.
And so like it's a lot that's going on right now because of all these like unnecessary hurdles that's going on right now in this administration.
Yeah.
Because like, you know, this administration doesn't see immigrants like how you and I see them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it can be a lot. So it's like, I think just also think of, especially like, you know, if you do come across a lot of like an undocumented person here and there, it's like, you know, they're going through a lot right now in
Mm.
addition to
Yeah.
what they already have to go through. And it's a really scary time.
Yeah. Well, that's all the more reason to compel us to really think through um, what it is we can do, both
Yeah.
practically and systemically. And that is very compelling because when I go to Kaiser Hospital here, a lot of people that are working in there are um, immigrants. You know, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people that serve us in our healthcare and in a variety of ways. Obviously, California probably more so than other states, but I know that around the United States, everywhere people have
Yeah.
immigrants in their state of various kinds, and and then in a lot of major urban areas around the world, right? And
Yeah.
so it's just a reminder to see people not as people serving us, but as like a person
Mm-hmm.
who might be living with a level of anxiety that we can't even imagine,
Yeah.
of not knowing whether next week they can continue to work. That would be really scary, especially during
Mm-hmm.
COVID. And so, yeah, that's very
And
compelling.
I think something else I'll add to, or like another practical way, especially like I think, you know, to help immigrants, specifically like undocumented immigrants, like, you know, if you are an eligible voter, please register to vote this year.
Mm,
This is like, I've heard this in so many different from so many different people, like this is like probably the most important election of our lifetime.
wow.
And there are hundreds of thousands of people that I personally know, my loved ones, that would do anything to vote this year because this election affects their lives.
Yeah. does.
And, and you can go to iwillvote.com, or you can go to iamavoter.com, check if you're registered, if you want to get registered. It takes less than a minute. It's another practical way to help out immigrant communities right now as well.
That's good. I love it. It's so great. And I do think that we want to hear from the voices of immigrants in this election, because they are certainly a part of our nation, a very valued part. And I've mentioned this before on a different episode, but unless you're Native American in the United States, full-blooded Native American, at some point in your history, there was an immigration story. And if for nothing else, it should be a really important issue to all of us when we vote. I know there's a lot of reasons people vote, but for me, it's a really, really important one. As someone who's been an immigrant in other nations around the world, who's walked through countless immigration signs, handed my passport, and hoped for a stamp and kindness, and just knowing what that feels like, and just wanting to be the kind of person that receives immigrants well here, because my faith compels me to, and the scriptures speak very, very clearly about it, but also just because of my own experience. And I think when you've experienced like what you did here in California, so many people welcoming your family and wanting to eat your food and celebrating your culture, then it really is a contagious thing. You want to do that for others because of how well you've been received. And I think one of the ways we can welcome and receive people well is to vote in such a way as to allow the policies to do that, and to share our resources and not be hoarding them or act with greed, which is a really evil way to live. And I do agree with you. I hope that people let their voices be heard on this issue. It's a really important one to me, which is why we're doing this series. And I'm so thankful that you came on and shared your personal story today, and also the really important work that you do here in California, especially with the DACA cases. I just think it's a really special, sacred place that you get to show hospitality to immigrants in this way, and very practical ways and systemic ways. And I'm just so grateful for you and you sharing your story with us today. So, muchas gracias.
De nada, Lori. Happy to be here and talk to you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Lori. Take care.
You too. Bye. Gracia is just such a great example of what it looks like to dedicate your life to helping those who really could use our help, especially in areas of systems that are stacked against immigrants. She really is just dedicating her life to helping people who need legal services, to help them out in situations where it's just too difficult for them to find representation. And I just love all the information she gave us today about DACA, and I hope it was very enlightening for you. There are so many issues related to immigration, and this is just one of many that she helped us pour into today. She's really just hopefully given you some things to think through. If DACA is a situation that is new for you and you haven't quite understood it, hopefully today she gave you more information to think about it. And once again, just like with all of our episodes, I would encourage you to bring this to your friends and family and community and your conversations. These are things we really, as a society, need to get different perspectives on and think through deeply, and not just on a surface level. These are deep issues that affect the lives of many dear people. And obviously she has people that are very close and dear to her that she's been able to help in this area as she's working with this organization that helps provide legal services for those who really need it. And, we've heard from so many in this series about just different ways we could all plug in and just help out. And hopefully this is just one of many things that have caused you to really think during this series in a different way and opened your eyes to new facets of this whole conversation. Next week, we're going to take a little 1-week break from our immigration series because it is Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12th. And some people celebrate that as Columbus Day, but we're going to talk about what it means to some of the Native Americans in the United States and get just a perspective from someone who just sees it from a different angle maybe than what you've been taught in history, or maybe you have had a good U.S. history course where you've kind of dug into some of those things and it won't be all that new. But for some of you, especially in different countries around the world who are used to just seeing America as cowboys and Indians, tune in for this because it's going to hopefully shed some new light on new perspective in history just to help us dig a little deeper into a perspective we don't often listen to in order to just commemorate this Indigenous Peoples Day and celebrate the perspective of someone who probably doesn't get their voice and their people's voice heard very often. So next week, Indigenous Peoples Day for October 12th. Really tune in for this one, and then we'll get back to our immigration series on the following week. Have a great week, guys. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.